Welcome, Utah. Thank you, Rhett Larsen and Shauntelle Cota, for joining us today on the Sound Off. We're excited to have you.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
just pleased as punch that we could get on your agenda. I know how busy it is for you out there. We are so lucky to get to work with you all and really enjoy being in the thick of it with all of you. And so really excited for our listeners to hear, about the good work you're doing and how it relates to all the good work they're doing. So lots to talk about today. But first, as promised, we are going to break the ice by asking you each what your super secret superpower is. Whatever little funny little thing about you that would surprise our listeners and delight our listeners. We always love these things that you wouldn't expect of all of us who do this work. So if we can, let's start with you, Shauntelle. What you got?
Happy to. I have to tell you, I've been racking my brain. I've even reached out to friends and family. And I keep asking, what is my superpower? And I just keep getting LOLs and funny memes back. So that was not helpful. But it kind of did get me to think about what my superpower is. And I really think it's just laughter. I really am known to bring laughter to any situation. And for me, it's helpful because it kind of just breaks down, whatever tension might be there and helps me to realize that there's just always so much bigger than what is right in front of us, always something so much bigger at play. Whatever your spiritual belief is, there's just always something bigger happening. And I think for me, laughter is the pathway back to that. And just to remember that, yes, we need to take some things seriously, but we should really never take ourselves too seriously. And laughter, I think, is the way I remember that.
That is maybe one of my favorite secret superpowers so far. That's phenomenal, and it really does tie back to the work that we all do. It's serious work, but there's camaraderie and almost a sense of family in this community that we've got nationally. So yeah, I'm for laughter. That's awesome. How are you going to follow that one up, Rhett?
That's a tough one. Something that I have been uh, able to do since I was a kid, and that is taking time, whether it be birthdays or Christmas or just a gift, out of nowhere, of really thinking about somebody and trying to connect with them in thinking of what is something that would be meaningful to them, what's something that would help them to have a brighter day or bring a smile to their face. And just to give an example, my mom, her parents died when she was at a young age. And so I was able to see that there's, some artists out there that can draw a current picture of, so I was able to take a current picture of my mom and have an artist paint a picture with her parents, as if they were alive today. And just meant a lot to her. And it happened to be something that was on her mind. And so I'm going to say the gift whisperer. And it's just great to be able to see when you take that time and it resonates with somebody and how it means something to them, just that look on their face of knowing that they were appreciated and thought of just means a lot to me.
Wow. I mean, that really speaks to so many, I think, of the values of our community, the connectedness, being able to listen and pay attention to what's important to people, because staying connected with this work, I think, is a bit of a secret sauce, and being able to find laughter and find joy in some of the challenges that we have, but in the working together and tackling these issues together. So I guess it's no secret why our team loves working with your team so much. That much is probably pretty obvious to our listeners here. But thanks for playing. That's just always a fun way to start the conversation and dig into some of the really serious topics that we face, across the country and across the world, really with these issues that we tackle and these challenges that we face in keeping our schools and communities safe and sound. So one thing I think that's unique and actually comes out in what you guys both shared is the importance of creating a culture. And we talked about that being our focus area today, creating, a culture of school safety, this shared, collaborative spirit, this kind of whole of community approach to ensuring that our schools and our students are safe every day and have the best possible environment to grow and learn in. But that's no small feat, right? You guys have been really hard at work, over the past, I would say 5 years or so. You can correct me as we talk about this, but have done some really heavy lifting. So, as we talk about that, let's maybe even define, what is it when we talk about this shared culture? What is it that we're trying to get our finger on? What are we pointing to? Because I feel like it's central to the work that all of our schools and communities, as well as our state leadership groups like yours in Utah, for example, that seems to be almost like a foundational piece to this work and to success. So let's just start there, and maybe define for our listeners, what does it mean to have this kind of culture of safety? What is that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and kind of get the conversation going. Michelle, what you're asking makes me think of a trip that the School Safety Center just recently took down to southern Utah. And during that time, we were there meeting with student service directors. And the goal of the trip for us was to bring the School Safety Center members in front of student service directors to be able to ask the tough questions. We're in a space right now in Utah where we have a lot of new policies impacting the way that schools are run, impacting policies at the local level, and just also impacting practices, and just a really kind of a new way of thinking about school. If we think back to like the Industrial Revolution when, we were sitting in rows, and that's kind of, where in some ways we've kind of been stuck there. And I think of that like in terms of safety, like we're kind of in our own safety revolution right now. I think we're, at least in the state of Utah, we're really kind of looking at things differently. We're looking at how we can refine things, and we're looking at what can make us better when it comes to having a culture of safety. And when we were down in southern Utah, the night before our meeting, we were invited to go on this kind of like off-roading trip. It was really cool. They got a bunch of like off-road side-by-sides, and they took us down, and we got to see like this like really cool terrain and go on these fun rides. And we ended up in this space with all of these like ancient like petroglyphs and like writings on the wall and carvings. And it was just so beautiful. And the reason I'm sharing this is because it makes me think about when you say culture, a lot of culture really comes down to like communicating a vision or an idea. And as I was looking at the mountains and kind of seeing what they envision their culture to be at the time, and then the way that we perceive their culture to be from the things, the writing on the wall, if you will. I think that really sticks with me when I think about school safety. It's like, what is our writing on the wall? What is it that we're bringing together around community and shared common understanding? And so I think when we look at it from that perspective, when we think of culture, really it's a common language of safety. And then that common language then feeds into common beliefs, values, and expectations that we then can come around and kind of rally around and in some ways get kind of excited about, because this is something that we value and we're invested in when it comes to school safety. And we're talking the same language, that we're removing the confusion and the mystery around safety. And we're just making it just something we do. And then even taking it a step further into something that we are. We are a safe community. We practice safe, we have safe practices so that it can be infused into who we are.
So exciting. Having kind of stepped into this work at a time where Utah was still kind of like just doing business as it had been for a really long time in terms of education and school safety. And as you guys know, and some of our listeners know, Utah is a pretty important place to my family and to my co-founding partner, Alyssa, and her family. She's from Utah. My brother, all my nieces and my nephew, and now grand nieces and nephews. It's crazy to admit that, but that's happening. The family continues to grow. They're all in Utah, and I know exactly where you're talking about because that's where my brother lives with all the kiddos, and it's a really unique place in Utah. Utah is so big geographically that there's a variety even within your state culturally, from community to community. So really is exciting to see this shift, this cultural shift, and this excitement. I love how you talked about it as like a revolution right now. So what are your thoughts, Rhett?
It's fun to remember that trip that we went on not too long ago, and it's something I wanted to bring up as well. And so this is perfect timing. As we were going on that those side by side rides, the person we were with was going incredibly fast. In fact, he would say,
I hope my brother was not your,
if he was still an incredible driver. He was just really fast. But he asked us, do you want to go, out of 0 to 10, how fast do you want to go? And of course, the person with us said, let's go at 10. And other folks who were in other side by sides, we were passing them up, or we were going on different trails. And what's interesting is in this part of Utah, when it rains, the trails will shift, right? As there's flooding that happens often. And so we were taking different paths. We were going as fast as we can. And sometimes it might feel with this shift in school safety that we're going incredibly fast. And that is because we want to continue to learn with and from other states. We want to implement the best practices as quickly and efficiently as possible. And as we went on this tour, I actually shared that with the student service directors the next day, that it might seem that we are, going full throttle. We are going at a 10, but we are there to support them. We're here to help be there with them. We're listening to them. And really that's what it takes. It's relationships is so critical. And that's something that I have seen that's quite impressive in Utah. Clear back in 2019, that ongoing relationship between policymakers and those who work in the education system and in law enforcement and in mental health, all coming together and looking at where are we and where do we need to go. And as you said, these last 5 years or so, we really have seen some monumental shifts. Mm-hmm. And I think it gets down to relationships, networking, understanding where we are, but having everyone and all the right people around the same table.
And I think what I hear too is just, honoring where people are, meeting people where they are. I love that analogy of like, how fast do you want to go? Like let's check in. Because we could go 0 to 60, or we could, we could go as slow as we need to, and in some cases, some of us on the team will be able to move a little faster, and others will find that their area of school safety needs to move a little bit more methodically, a little bit more carefully. So I just think that that's fascinating, and I have to believe that the success that we get to see you guys having has a lot to do with being willing to just stop and listen and do that landscape assessment, literally looking at the writing on the wall, hearing from your constituents. Yes, it's wonderful to have that leadership, law, and policy guidance, coming from the higher ups and from all those important agencies. But what the center seems to have done is kind of stepped in and said, okay, these are the realities. These are the goals we're trying to meet. Now, how can we help you? How can we help you to get there? How can we make this manageable? How can we walk this walk with you? So it really is exciting. So there's almost like this statewide culture that you have, and then there's kind of the more regional cultures, and then each community in and of themselves, they have their own unique culture as well. I know I have family in the Salt Lake area. I have family in the St. George area. And those of you who don't know Utah, I mean, those are must-see spaces, but very, very different in terms of the culture and the needs of those communities. So really exciting. So let's talk about some of let's go back to the beginning, right? If we're talking about how you do this, this is a pretty young program. This is a pretty young center. We've got your counterparts who I love, Rhett, how that was part of your the work that you did when at the outset is reach out to your partners in other states and learn what's working for them. What are some of the challenges? How do they tackle funding? How do they do outreach? What are what are their key initiatives and offerings. But there's a lot of different ways to go about this. So let's talk about the beginning for you guys. Like, where do you even start? How does if it's a state or a district or a single school, how do you go about beginning to create this culture of safety?
I think one of the things that I'm thinking of as you're speaking, Michelle, is, for us in Utah, the starter bill really was House Bill 61. And that was the first school safety bill that really kind of got the focus on school safety and moving things forward in a way that we hadn't really thought about moving things forward. So, we've always had counselors in schools. We've had, mental health therapists and folks, and we've had buildings that have had to be up to code. But this bill really kind of brought different stakeholders around the table to really look at school safety, and even more drill down. It got people to come around a school and start to rethink, what is a school? Is a school a public space? Is a school, considered part of just the education system? Or do we consider, their safety needs just as important as the needs of the local mall or, the local amusement park or whatever, is around? And that really kind of got some interesting conversations going. And so, yeah, and kind of thinking through, well, wait a minute, if we have these, standards for an airport even, how are we translating that into the safety of a school, and who really has ownership of that? And should it just stay in the education system, or should this be more of a community effort? And that's where we started seeing more and more partners wanting to come to the table. So Department of Public Safety and awesome, they call themselves the Office of Substance Use and Mental Health, and all of those kind of players around, what is this place that we've just always known as school? Now we have some different eyes on it. And so what does that look like? And so you can imagine from there, it kind of just started snowballing into different things. And then, of course, you have different advocacy groups and people coming in with ideas, not one better or worse, just different ideas and different perspectives of how a school community could be safe. And so when I look at it from my perspective as being in a director position, I want to take all of the great ideas and kind of morph it into something. And I remember thinking, what's the glue here? And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about previously with the writing on the wall, and what common language can we get around? Because the one thing that I could find that was consistent between all of the conversations that I had with whether it were Republicans or Democrats or, police officers or principals, is nobody could argue that we wanted kids safe. Everybody could come back to the fire around that. We could all come back around whatever disagreements we had about how to get to safety. We could all come back around the fire around kids deserve and need to be safe. And so that was kind of the cultural piece that we kind of kept coming around. And so then as I was thinking about, well, how do we then keep coming back to the fire, if you will, and keep having those conversations? So I was really excited when some legislation came out around standard response protocols. And this is kind of made famous through the I Love You Guys Foundation. But it was exciting for me because it started to be kind of that foundational glue, if you will, that like, okay, we can build something with this. If we're at least using common language and there's something that we use across the state that we've agreed upon, these sayings mean these things in school safety, then perhaps we can continue the conversation in chapters, if you will. And what could the next chapter say and the next chapter say? So as we're building it and knowing there are, competing values and ideas and philosophies on safety, what can we use as that common standardized language to keep us moving forward? So I think that when you talk about the beginning, I think that standard response protocol language really, for me, was the way to, okay, this is the beginning. Now let's keep building. And then we moved from House Bill 61 to House Bill 84. And that's where we really, I think, more of the safety amendments kind of came into play and more of the physical building requirements. So again, that gave us an opportunity to talk about common language. What is agreed upon, at least in the law, that schools need. And here we're talking about physical parameters. We're talking about fencing. We're talking about ballistic windows, single point entry, things of that nature. That again, it's now codified and we can come around a conversation, agree or disagree. We have something that says this is what will keep students inside of a building safe. And so I think that's where we are, and the conversations now that so that's the next chapter, if you will. The conversations we're coming into now are, okay, so, but what is safety? So, okay, we've got some of these definitions in common language, but I think where we are now, Michele, is coming around a culture of defining safety. And in conversations I've had with law enforcement and others, this is another point that Republicans, Democrats, whatever party you belong to, kind of has come around to the same place, which is safety consists of three things. We have the physical space, and we have culture and climate. So we have culture, which is the way that we do things. Climate is the way we feel about how we do things. And then we have that physical space where you feel there's a perception of, like, these walls will protect me. This where I'm sitting feels safe and it feels good and a good place for learning. And so I think that's kind of where we are right now is, okay, if we can come around the idea that is the nucleus of safety, then how do we continue that common language that then feeds into common practices?
So I think that's almost like a playbook, that you just laid out. When I think of how a lot of our schools and communities really begin digging down and building a foundation, and then moving on to the framing, and then moving on, all of that. A lot of our schools and communities have kind of followed that sequence, right? There's usually some kind of law, some kind of policy dictation that's coming out, or in some communities, it's a tragic event that is that kind of impetus behind, whoa, we gotta back the bus up, and we really have to focus on this. I think about Utah in many ways has been this place where you sort of culturally, it was like it was back in time, and so I think that was one of the special things about a lot of communities in Utah, but also one of the very challenging things in terms of how we have this conversation about safety. So it's interesting that it was legislation. A lot of that, I have to believe, based on our conversations, kind of was spurred by tragedies like the Parkland tragedy, and others around the country in schools and communities. So whatever that, impetus is, whatever that moment is where all of a sudden people are kind of sitting up and realizing, okay, we need to bring people together around this. There's usually that. And then there's this, okay, what are we talking about here? And in Utah, especially because it's in many places kind of back in time, we have to define what school is. I love how you laid that out, Shauntelle, because the schoolhouse, the school building, the campus, it gets used not just in Utah, like across the United States, for a million other things besides school. There are communities come into worship on the weekends. There's Cub Scouts. There's AA meetings. There's all kinds of things our communities are utilizing the school facilities for, events, all kinds of things, right? So we really do have to, it's a unique space, and but we do have the right to create some boundaries around it, just like we have in our other places, like our airports or our banks, any other place that houses precious people, or is particularly vulnerable. And then I like how you moved into the conversation about, common language. And I think that's why a lot of our schools and communities begin this work with the SRP from I Love You Guys. For those of you who are not familiar, it's the Standard Response Protocol. It's one of the programs that I Love You Guys, the nonprofit school safety organization, offers. It's one of their signature programs, and it really does just that. I mean, it is exactly how school safety was built in the Jeffco, district where the Columbine tragedy took place. So just establishing, okay, these are the essentials. We know we need to have these procedures, and we know that we all need to call them the same thing, and we know that we'll need to do these things. That is a wonderful beginning to the whole conversation, and then to your emergency operations plans. Because with that foundation, now we can start building out, okay, are we going to add options-based conversations to this, and education and training? Are we going to add behavioral threat assessment to be focused on prevention? Are we going to be adding some physical safety requirements. So that kind of balance that you referred to in its most simplest form, between the physical and the psychological, in its most simple form. So it is also a uniquely unifying mission, and I think to lean into the fact that whoever you are, whatever your belief system, whatever your politics may be, we all want our kids to be safe. We all want our communities to be safe, and just returning back to that as center when things get challenging. It's just sticking to those core principles. We're not going to deviate from them. So what would you say, Rhett, in terms of the building, and the what it's been like from those foundational moments that Shauntelle described, and how you have gotten it, I have to say, in such a short amount of time beyond the foundation. We've framed the thing out. We're now adding additions. There's all kinds of initiatives that you guys are building off of this kind of central unit here.
Absolutely. You mentioned, we when these horrific things happen in other states, that gets people in other states, really thinking, where are we? They're doing their own internal assessments of where are we with safety. And as you mentioned, the horrific event in Parkland in 2018, really we started seeing that shift in 2019, as the legislature. School safety was not new to our schools, but at the state level, it was new. And they allocated funds to bring together multiple state agencies to create the school safety center. And in the very beginning, we were given money and everything was more of a pilot program. We ourselves were going out to other states and learning what are the best practices that are out there. And really, what was monumental as well is taking people with us. So we had grants where they were able to utilize funds to go out to some other states, to their state sponsored school safety conferences, and learn what are these best practices. For example, like what Shauntelle was referring to, the SRP being standardized throughout the state. I remember sitting in Texas with superintendents who were able to go out to the Texas School Safety Conference. And one of the takeaways as they were debriefing is we need to have standardized language in our state. And so then that started the conversation. And as Shauntelle said, really, we started to see the monumental shift in House Bill 61. And really, one of the key moments, or to me, a key moment of getting us there was just before that legislative session, we were invited by Max Schachter in the state of Florida to go to Florida and tour the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where the Parkland school shooting took place. And that was a life changing experience for me. I can honestly say I completely changed, after that tour, and going through that building and learning, what are the takeaways? What have we learned from this horrific event? What I was not prepared for was to walk through that building with the parents who had lost their children in that shooting. And as we were able to go through that tour, we had policymakers with us, we had other leaders with us, and it's all about going back to learning with and from other states and where do we need to move our state. And that was critical in our policymakers then going back to our state, continuing those conversations with the state of Florida, the state of Texas, and others of what have they learned since, and where do we need to move Utah? And that really started, like Shauntelle, with House Bill 61 in Utah, which is the school safety requirements bill in 2023. And then this last legislative session with House Bill 140, or there was House Bill 140, the standard response protocols, and then this year, House Bill 84, which is the school safety amendments bill. And that takes several years of lessons learned in Florida as they have moved the needle in school safety. We took a lot of those lessons learned, and it's in House Bill 84 in one bill. And so there's a lot of shift, a lot of changes, and a lot of new requirements. And it takes all of those into one, but we'll continue to build and implement those requirements we've come a long ways. We have a long ways to go, but really the focus of everyone coming together and learning, again, the policymakers, school leaders, teachers, parents, it takes everyone coming together and learning and wanting to implement what these best practices are. And that includes funding, right? And so having the legislature not only require new building safety requirements or new personnel requirements, it's also, hey, where's the funding need? And in Utah, we are now required to have building safety assessments from all the schools that will help us understand, where is the need and where is the financial need so that we can use that to share with policymakers of where we need to go next. Another critical thing I think that has been important is we learned from Indiana about the model of school safety specialists. And in
Mhm.
Utah, we've adopted that model where we now have a school safety and security specialist in every school, and they are provided a stipend for those additional responsibilities, which is important. If we're going to add responsibilities, we need to make sure we're funding those additional responsibilities so that really the there's the interest, there's the time for folks to really focus on that. And so bringing all of this together of having the school safety and security specialists, having these new requirements, having the funding, some funding there, and the ongoing conversation of additional need is critical to move the ship, to keep moving the needle in school safety.
Yeah, and we've had conversations, you and I, in the past where you have mentioned that you know, it's it is a big effort. It's a heavy lift, and we'll keep building, we'll keep taking this journey, but that will never arrive. I love that. Will you unpack that a little bit for our listeners?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. And going back to, speaking about the best practices, you mentioned earlier, threat assessment in Utah. We require threat assessment and we require all of these important things that Shauntelle has mentioned and that I have mentioned. And we continue to learn, as I mentioned, with and from other states, but we will never arrive in school safety. And the reason why is it's continually shifting. There's a lot of new behaviors. There's a lot of new bad actors are learning new ways of causing harm to our schools. There's new challenges every single school year and every week or month of the school year, and we need to continue to learn and try to get ahead of these things and help each other across the nation, which I think you are part of this multidisciplinary team, if you will, Michele, of sharing with other states that, hey, this state is doing this and this state is doing this. And we'll continue to improve and be better, but we won't arrive because we need to continue to learn and do the best that we can for our most important asset, which is our kids in those seats, doing everything we can for them to be successful in their education journey.
Well, let me just say, it's one of my favorite things about this job is connecting good people. I think it comes from teaching, where we beg, borrow, and steal like everything from each other. And that's just the way that we do business. No good idea gets used once. It gets used, hundreds of thousands of times, and it gets made better, and it gets, circulated again, and all of that. And so that's definitely something that it's been a joy to bring to the national conversation, and connect good folks from all corners of the country that are doing really great stuff, and can learn from one another. I think it's really inspiring how the center in Utah has leveraged years of lessons, and hard-earned lessons, and and just really groundbreaking work from your counterparts. You mentioned Indiana and Florida, Texas. Those are just a few of the folks that I know that you have connected with and learned from, and now are sharing kind of back and forth. So that's how we get better. We stay current with one another. We continue to challenge each other. Now, one thing, speaking of challenges, that could be a big obstacle for you guys, and I'm curious how you manage this with this rate of growth in the state. with the incredible blessing of actual funding to go with some of these codes and mandates. All of this is wonderful, but it's an awful lot all at once, right? So it would be very easy for school communities, administrators to feel as though they're drinking from the fire hose, right? And at a time in education, I think when we are busier than we've ever been. I mean, just ask a teacher, an administrator, or a school counselor. Like folks just can't keep up. So how do we support that? How do we support the level of change that we want to see, the expectations that we have for keeping our schools, our communities, and our kids safe, while not burning out our very most precious assets in terms of implementation and getting that job done? How are you guys addressing that?
Yeah, I think one thing to be mindful of is just going back to that consistency in practice and making sure that everyone is speaking that common language. And one way that we are moving towards that is through our school safety needs assessments. So this year, we allowed schools to have some choice in the assessment that they use. They could use the REMS or anything that had some type of an accreditation piece to it. So they were able to do that. And the reason for that is a couple of reasons. One, with just the sake of time, we wanted schools to have their needs assessment in so that we could provide that funding and so that they could do a check of their school. But moving forward, we are working with our chief of security at Utah to make sure that there is a standardized assessment. And why I think this is important to this conversation, Michelle, is because once we have that unified assessment, schools are going to be able to come together around, again, a common language, a common theme of what is safe, what is a safe school, and what does a safe space look like. And the School Safety Center, led by Rhett, is really doing a really good job with partnering with DPS under Chief Pennington to look at those different factors. So the physical parameters, there's a work group that's studying all of the physical parameters from all of these assessments coming in. What are the top things and what are the things that align with our code, but also align with best practices in safety. And then Rhett and his team are looking at the culture and climate. So do we have bullying policies in place? Do we have disciplinary codes and definitions that make sense and not only are able to be uploaded into a system for data, but do they make practical sense for our schools? So we are pulling in work groups of leaders at schools to ask those questions. Do these definitions make sense? If, do these things work? And if they don't, what do we need to do at a state level to provide better training and support to all of you? And then another component within the needs assessment is schools can apply to Chief Pennington's office for an alternative. So if there's something that they're saying, I can't meet this for whatever reason that might be. So an example of that could be, hey, we are a tiny school in like the far corner of Utah. I've only got 150 kids. I don't have all of this personnel. I need to wear this hat, even though in code it says it can't be me as the principal. They can apply and they can submit an application to Chief Pennington's office, and they'll consider that. They'll consider several factors such as enrollment, need, what their plan looks like. And so I think balancing that with then the accountability piece, because I think there are always like two, it's like a pair of glasses, right? You want to look through. We certainly want to offer the support and the training. And also we need to keep our other line of sight on the accountability piece. And I think that needs assessment is going to be important for that as well, because again, it gets everyone using that same tool, looking at funding through that lens of, what is considered safe, what do we need to do to keep our kids safe. And then we have started to create just a compliance framework to help students. So it's a tiered level of support that really is meant to be supportive. So it's 1 through 5 levels. Levels 1, 2, and 3 are really checking in with the schools. Hey, it seems like something's out of compliance. Level 1, here's a letter just to make sure you and I are, on the same page. Level 2 would be, okay, the issue hasn't been addressed. Here's some training. What can we do? What support do you need? Do you understand, what's being asked? Really checking for understanding. And then level 3, and this kind of gets, I think, to the heart of your question, Michelle, is, okay, so levels 1, and the schools received a letter, they still are not in compliance. So level 3 is, well, what's your plan? So do you not have fencing, for example, because you don't have the funding? Can you write up a plan that says by year, 2027, we will have the funding source we need for fencing? great, let's talk. Let's have a conversation around what you need. And is fencing the most important thing, or is a single point entry the most important thing for you to be focusing on? And so your plan and your funding source is really going to focus on that. You recognize that, yeah, we're out of compliance with fencing, and this is why. And so we're really just looking for that conversation and making sure that we're all speaking, again, that same level of safety across the state. And then it goes on to Form 5. And again, we hope that, we don't even get to those points, because again, our goal is really to just bring everyone around. So there are a lot of opportunities for conversation and planning within the structures that we've built.
So I think that's fantastic. I want to back up because you talked about, this tiered system to really kind of meet people's needs where they are, and address the realities of trying to implement changes. You mentioned some assessments that I just want to unpack for people who are listening. So in several different states, they have their own tools, as you talked about. Really that sort of end goal for you guys is to have a uniform assessment tool that really seems to address physical safety, as well as does it also address some of the psychological safety pieces or the culture pieces? Are they different assessments? Or when you talk about these assessments like the REMS assessment or some of the tools available through CISA, and REMS, everybody, is the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools. You can just look up REMS for schools, and it's housed within the Department of Education. Tons and tons and tons of resources there for you, as well as assessment tools, and also our CISA, CISA, under the Department of Homeland Security, has schoolsafety.gov. So schoolsafety.gov has a lot of these tools and can connect you to a lot of the free tools that are out there just to get started. But let's just define for folks, what are we talking about with these assessments, and what are some of the tools that specifically that they could use just to get started?
So as Shauntelle said, this first year they can use any of those reputable, needs assessments. In the future, and part of that work group that Shauntelle mentioned, that we're pulling together, we've pulled together professionals of looking at where are we with culture and climate, and in our school, in school climate surveys across the nation, what data are they collecting to understand where schools are? How are their kids feeling? How are their teachers feeling? And the parents feeling, the faculty. It's all important of understanding where do they feel they are with school safety, and then also measuring where the school safety is in a comprehensive approach. And so that tool that we are building, that we are helping to build with the Department of Public Safety, will capture not only the physical safety in assessing where they are, like for single limited point entry, locks on doors, cameras, fencing that was mentioned, but also understanding that culture and climate, which is critical in providing, school safety for all. And
Yeah.
so I look forward to creating, having that tool created. Honestly, it's a great journey, even being in the process of helping
Yeah.
create this and looking at what data is critical, not just for us in moving the program forward and what's next, but more importantly, for the schools to assess, understand where they are, where people feel, and then what they need to do to help improve and continually improve school safety through that comprehensive lens.
Excellent, excellent. So lots of I love just let's use what's good and what's out there, and maybe kind of create our own amalgamation that covers all of the aspects of school safety. Y'all are very familiar with our comprehensive framework for school safety, and are like living and breathing and building with it, and it's exciting to see. But so many pieces, so many moving parts. I think what I feel when I talk to you guys about creating this culture is that it's alive and it's growing and it's breathing and it's changing. But you guys are very plugged into your people, very plugged into your school communities, your school leaders, having a really strong presence from state level leadership to kind of cut that path for you guys to block and tackle and put some legislation and some guardrails in place for people. It's really something. You've got quite a lot of momentum. So we're looking forward to keeping tabs on you on the journey. And there's a wonderful event that y'all host each year, generally like June-ish, mid-June-ish. So for folks that are wanting to join, many of our national school safety community members will convene in Utah, just as they do in Texas for Texas's annual event, and Virginia and so on. So it's always great to, just connect with the larger community and also take in some of that regional flavor and learn from that. But before we close, guys, I just want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners as we all look to build an active, dynamic culture that is really engaging in all of our schools and communities around safety. What would be like the one thing you would want us to go know? Be sure we don't leave this conversation without. So if I can offer you each that opportunity to sound off, I'll start with you, Rhett, this time, since I started with Shauntelle last time.
Absolutely. And thank you for this opportunity. It's been great to work with you and continue to learn from you. And thanks for all the incredible knowledge and experience that you have shared with Utah, and looking forward to that ongoing collaboration. Thank you, Michele. One of the critical things for me, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, and my apologies, but you'll just know I'm very passionate about it. It's having the right people around the table, and also celebrating our successes, but not getting comfortable with where we are. We need to be happy with all the improvements, even if they're little, in school safety, but we can't be comfortable. We need to know that we need to continue to learn and to grow and to be the best that we possibly can for our greatest assets, which is our kids in those seats. But again, making sure we have the right people around the table, that everyone is passionate and willing to put into the work, and keeping the kids at the center of the center focus.
I love all of that. I also just love don't get comfortable. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Shauntelle.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Rhett said. I love the idea of bringing the right people around the table. And I just kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, just kind of rethinking like that revolutionary way of approaching school safety. And, we've got to shift our mindset on what a safe environment looks like. Just like we've shifted our mindset on what a learning environment looks like. No longer, I would dare anyone to go into a school and see rows of, right? I mean, we don't teach that way any longer.
No.
And so we've got to do safety a different way. And we really need to make sure that we are open-minded and have that growth mindset around what does safety look like? What does safety feel like? And just kind of going back to what Rhett said, when we're thinking about people to include, Michele, you asked like, what's the one thing that people should do? Talk to the kids, talk to the students. What makes them feel safe? What do they see as needing? Get the students involved. That student voice will surprise and just enlighten any conversation around safety. I think as adults, we would just be surprised the knowledge that kids have around their own perception of safety and what's really happening in a school. And, schools are unlike, Michele, this from being a former teacher. I'm a former fourth grade teacher, best year, to teach in my opinion. And, like when I loved that, and I still have fond memories, but just, I even as a director of a state am removed. I'm not boots on the ground any longer.
Right.
And so it's so important to keep meeting with the teachers, meeting with the students, and making sure that we're hearing their voice in safety, because at the end of the day, we can put policies in place, but if they don't carry out the policies when or if something should happen, it's all for naught. We need everyone to come around the table and really be invested in safety. And in order to make that happen, we have to hear the student and teacher voice as well.
Well said. We're going to leave it there on that note. This has been Rhett Larsen and Shauntelle Cota from the Utah School Safety Center. Thank you guys for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
It's a pleasure.